You know, it is a good day, is it not? I think it's a good day, even though, it is a sad day. It is a remembrance of 9/11 and what happened, that tragedy many years ago. We've also had a historic event take place this week. The Queen has passed away, and there's now a king in Buckingham Palace. And despite what you may think of the monarchy, it's a historic event that will mark the pages of history forever. And with that, I've been wondering, what will history remember Queen Elizabeth II for? Will it be how she got the throne? Will it be how long she reigned for? Will it be the scandals that happened? Will it be the military service? Will it be the fact that she could drive a train? Will it be the positive stuff she's done? Will it be the negative things she's been known for? Or overall, how will this queen be viewed in years to come? What is it that she's going to be known for as future generations look back at this time and say, she was a queen that was just fill in the blank. Maybe you've read the headlines that date back to 2016 where she said she served Jesus as her king. Or maybe you've read the book that was written, which was called The Servant Queen and the King She Serves. A book that focuses on the queen's own words, that draws out the central role of her trust in Jesus Christ in shaping her life and her work and her reign as monarch. Did you know that her faith was very important to her and that she would draw great comfort in difficult times from Christ's word? I did not know that. I never saw her as that type of leader. And depending on where you live or what you read, you might not see that either. Especially if you're like me and you like clicking on those rumor sites or those conspiracy sites or something else. You might see she's more of a reptilian than a Christian. I don't know. That's just me. But we'll never really know where she stands in any of that stuff. We won't know what is true from what we read and what isn't true as the history looks back. And that's the reality we face these days. So will history remember the queen as the servant queen or something else? But only history and time is going to decide that for us. So isn't that thought? What will you be remembered for? Who will you be remembered as? Will you be remembered for the great things you did or the exact opposite, the failures you had? And when I was thinking about that, I'm thinking, how many funerals do we stand at where we laugh and tell stories of the embarrassing things we've done or the things that have happened? And it's like, what will you be remembered for? The good or the bad? We remember the stupid things because usually they're the funny things. But we also remember the failings. Even though the great things have happened, even though great things were done, that stain of failure or their mistake can overshadow so much good. So how will any of us be remembered, or will we be worth remembering at all? And honestly, once again, only time will decide that, because we cannot really predict what's going to happen. Despite our best efforts, we can't really know what we will be remembered for, will we? I was thinking about all of this as I was thinking about the queen, and as I was reading my Bible, and I came across this woman in the Bible. And she was known for one thing, or better yet, she was identified with this one thing. But she turned out to be someone else completely. And those who knew her most likely never called her a woman of faith or courage. That was probably the last things they thought of when they thought of this woman, especially considering who she was and where she was. Nobody thought that she would become who she became. And I'm talking with the prostitute Rahab. And that is how she is known as, Rahab the prostitute. Her and her family's lives were spared in one of the most amazing battles history has ever recorded, which was the fall of Jericho, where those walls fell down, but her spot didn't. Jericho and the whole siege of it is just this amazing story where God did just such an amazing thing. And she lived in this city that was filled with these great warriors, because this was an impenetrable city. And there's obviously these great engineers in this city because they built this thing. And this city was a reputation of being one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful city in Canaan. It was impenetrable. It was the fortress of fortresses. Yet when we talk about this city, apart from the fall of the walls, apart from Joshua and the Israelites and God taking it over, it is the faith and courage of this prostitute that is remembered. Not the king, not the engineers, none of the warriors, but this woman. So this morning I want to take a look at who she is and who she was and who God used. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Joshua 2 this morning. And we're going to start right at verse 1. We're going to go through the whole story. So then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there the night. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Rahab had hidden these 2 men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier, but I didn't know where they were from. They left the town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Verse 6, actually, she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax she had laid out. So the king's men went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. And as soon as the king's men had left, the gates of Jericho were shut. Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk with them. I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror. For we have heard about the Lord, how he made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things, for the Lord your God is the supreme God of heavens above the earth, the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. You know, Rahab is just mentioning these things that have happened with the Israelites in the last 40 years of wandering. And she's talking about this reputation that this God of the Israelites has, and it's just gaining this momentum. It's causing people to be scared. People in the land are terrified. And she brings up these 2 kings who were actually these giants of men. And she said, you completely destroyed their people. You didn't win. You didn't battle them. You completely destroyed their people. And we're terrified now. And these stories are being shared amongst the enemy of God's people. This story is being shared through the promised land, the one that Joshua has come to take. You know, God is very powerful. This God of the Israelites is not one you mess with. And the people are worried because they know he's coming this way. And regardless of the fact that they live in Jericho, fear is upon this city. And Rahab says she knows. She knows the Lord has given them this land. And that the Lord your God is the supreme God of heaven and earth. And so verse 12, she says, now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live, along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety. The men agreed, if you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us this land. And with that, this agreement is made. You protect us, we protect you. But Rahab has also agreed that this God the Israelites serve is now the God she will serve. Verse 15 says, then since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Escape to the hill country, she told them. Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then, when they have returned, you can go on your way. You know, go hide and wait for 3 more days. And once that time is over, the men will return to the city. She's sharing this information with these spies. And you know, you're going to be able to leave safely if you wait for these 3 days. And for some reason, Rahab knows the plans of those who were sent out searching for these men. Maybe someone told her, maybe she's watched, maybe she just has this battle knowledge. We don't know, but she's wiser than the people have given her credit for. After all, she's already secured a deal with her for her family's safety as well as her. And she's like, now just wait. Because she could have sent them off to their death. It would have been none the wiser. But she says, wait. And she has this wisdom. She has this wisdom about her that's overlooked because of who she is and how she lives. Verse 17, before they left, the men told her, we will be bound by the oath we have taken only if you follow these instructions. When we come into the land, you must leave the scarlet rope hanging from the window through which you let us down. And all your family members, your father, mother, brothers, and all your relatives must be here inside the house. If you go out into the street and are killed, it will not be our fault. But if anyone lays a hand on people inside this house, we'll accept the responsibility for their death. If you betray us, however, "We are not bound by this oath in any way." "I accept your terms," she replied. And she sent them on their way, leaving the scarlet rope hanging from the window. The spies went up the hill country and stayed there 3 days. The men who were chasing them searched everywhere along the road, but they finally returned without success. The 2 spies came down from the hill country, crossed the Jordan River, and reported to Joshua all that had happened to them. "The Lord has given us the whole land," they said, "for all the people in the land are terrified of us." It's an awesome story. I love the book of Joshua. And this story of Rahab is one that is just full of sacrifice, redemption, and hope. It's a story that reminds us that we too can be more than what we are. And that despite what we have done or how we have lived or where we have come from or anything else, we can still leave a legacy of courage and faith for our family, our community, or even for history to remember us by. Rahab is a reminder that we're not held to the past or to labels that we carry, even the ones society wants to place on us. That's a different narrative than what today's generation is dealing with. Today's generation is dealing with labels as identification. It's a definition of character. It's their sexuality. It's who they are. The world is redefining these labels, and we are reducing people down to pronouns. Society has long moved away from this understanding that we've been created in the image of God. It has put us in a culture of politically correctness that's really not that correct. And there's so many problems with that because we are so much more. We are so much more. And I'm not going to go down that road this morning at all, so don't worry. But these labels sometimes can define us. And not just sexual pronouns, but these labels define who we are. And they can come against who you're created to be. And our youth are falling into this trap of being labeled or wanting to be labeled without even knowing the true consequences that it can carry. The sad thing is, as well, is sometimes those labels actually do direct our path. They direct our path because that's where we end up, because we think that's who we are. And so that's where we go. Not because we want to, but because that's where we're labeled. That's where we're set off to be now. Because who we're told who we are. Rahab was just a prostitute. Do we allow ourselves to believe and be defined by those names when there's so much more put inside of us? We put limits on who we are or who we can be the moment we put a name on us, the moment we put a label on us. We've limited our potential. There was a quote that was said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by the ability to climb a tree, it'll live its whole life believing that it is stupid." They said Einstein wrote that quote. He did not. But somebody did, and it's a very odd quote. But there's something to it. Fishes were never made to climb trees. And history has remembered Rahab as a prostitute. But she was a prostitute who found faith and had courage to live up to be more than what she was ever expected to be. She lived up to be more than what people thought she could be. She most likely never wanted to be living like how she ended up. And we don't know why she ended up being a prostitute. But I can bet you that it wasn't who she wanted to be. Especially as a young child growing up, you don't aspire for that. This is not the future she would have wanted. But she has found herself living this life in Jericho. And she's different. She's not a temple prostitute. And a temple prostitute was an important thing in the Canaanite culture. It was a status thing. It was an honorable thing. And it was a good thing. It was a part of worship. Rahab was simply a prostitute. And depending on what you read, sometimes it says she was just an innkeeper. And that's not always the case. Everyone in the city of Jericho knew who she was, including the king. And so with that, this woman would not be one who would have a husband. That's why her husband wasn't mentioned in this. She would not have been a member of society. She had carried no real value as a person. And she was basically the low person in the city. And so it made sense that these spies would seek shelter in her place, because no one would find odd that men were coming and going in the middle of night from her house. After all, that's just Rahab's house. It's what we expect. But there's so much more to this woman than what we read. And there are these clues that this woman was so much more than just a prostitute. For instance, in verse 6, she said she hid the spies on the roof under some flax. And in verse 18, she tied a scarlet rope out of the window to let them know which house to spare. And these are not just things a woman of her sort or her kind would have or even need. These, however, were items that someone who manufactured garments or who dyed linen, who created things would have. Rahab was a businesswoman. She was smart. And we know that because of how she interacted with the guards who came searching for these spies. How she knew that, you got 3 days wait before they come back to the city. Rahab knew stuff. She knew what was going to happen. And she knew that this moment right now with these spies was a defining moment. And that this God of Israel, he was the real deal. And even though she knew all that stuff, even though she was probably more than just this prostitute, this story and history has identified her as Rahab, the prostitute. And you've heard me say that a lot, and I say that a lot because that is how she is defined. But she was so much more. Rahab was a woman of faith who modeled it with bravery when it mattered the most, because faith is the opposite of fear, and she showed that. You can read Isaiah 12, you can flip over to Psalm 118, Romans 8, you can read about what faith is and battling fear, but you can read it here in Joshua 2:9 where it says, I know the Lord has given you this land, she told them. We're all afraid of you. Everyone in this land is living in terror. We are scared, for we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. We know what you did to Sihon and Og, those giants, those two Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you've completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of heaven above and the earth below. Rahab's fear was genuine, it was real, and it could have played out in so many different ways. She could have used this opportunity to turn these spies over. And who knows how the story would have been told then if she would have turned these spies over and they would have been tortured, killed. Joshua's army would have found. Who knows? We would not be reading it how we read it now. But Rahab knew that the Lord had given the Israelites this land. She knew that this God of the Israelites, that the Israelites followed, was the real God. Rahab had faith in this God she only heard stories about. She believed in this God who's coming across their land in a new way. And she shares that. She says, I know the history of what you guys have gone through since you've left Egypt. And she spoke about these things this God has done. And she sits in her house that's on the wall of this impenetrable city. And she's scared because she knows that Israel's going to win. Israel's going to be victorious. Somehow, some way this is going to play out and God is going to do something. So in the face of fear, in the face of the impossible, Rahab stepped out into her new faith. And it led her to the deliverance of her and her family. James 2:25 says, Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away by a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. And many years later, James shares that Rahab the prostitute's actions, her courage, what she did in that moment defined her faith in God. And with that, I detach myself sometimes from this story because it's only in one chapter and you read through it and you overlook the reality of how long this would have taken for this woman and for this family. From the moment she welcomed those spies into her house, from Joshua chapter 2 all the way to Joshua chapter 6, when the army shows up and spends a week walking around the city and takes it down, we forget what she would have been dealing with, what she would have gone through, what it would have felt like to spend those days wondering, waiting, hoping. What do you think Rahab was doing in that time between the spies' departure and the fall of the city? And in a situation like that, what do you do? How do you demonstrate your faith on a daily basis when it's so new to you? How did she do it? What did she do? She just walked out in her faith. But it was more than that. Rahab is known also as this woman of courage. And there's so many things this woman has done to show how courageous she truly was up to this point. Right from accepting these guys and risking her life to save them, hiding them, trusting them. Rahab did a lot in such a short time. And we look at this story from our perspective and we see the outcome. We know the outcome. It's a no-brainer. And even though she said she believed all these things about the God of Israel, she truly did not know how this was all going to go. They could have failed. And so not only does this woman have faith, she has the courage to stand against what she knows and to follow her faith. Even to the point of having to convince her family what was at hand and what was at stake. And what if they didn't believe? Or what if someone in her family let something slip that could cost her her life? And I could carry on with this story of who Rahab is. There is so much about this woman. But hopefully you're getting the understanding of the character of her. She was more than this label of a prostitute. She was more than what she was defined as. She was more than what the city thought her to be. But yet we still describe her that way. Because this is where her faith and courage really come into play now in her life. It's where it comes into play in our lives as well. Her faith changed her. And our faith changes us. Our faith gives us the ability to overcome who we were or who people may try to say we are. Our faith gives us freedom from those labels that will hold us down. And that's the heart of this message this morning. Despite what we have done or how we've lived or who we are or what we've been doing, we have the opportunity to be so much more and do so much more. The story of Rahab, her story illustrates that God's purpose is not limited by who we are or what we've done or who we even think we are. And God's plan for you in your life is greater than your failures and exceeds your successes. Rahab's faith in who the God of Israel was changed her life. And if we just take a brief moment and flip over to Matthew chapter 1, which is arguably the most boring chapter in the New Testament because it has this lineage of Christ. Well, who do we find in verse 5? Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Rahab is now married, and she has found a place in the lineage of Christ as a mother. And her son Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and Obed was the father of Jesse. And you know what? Jesse was the father of King David. And we have a Canaanite prostitute who's found herself the great-great-grandmother of King David, and she's in the lineage of Christ. Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that this prostitute, that Rahab would have found herself in this place? Rahab wasn't, she's a hero. She's a hero because of her faith and her courage and what she did. And it was only a small little point in her life, but it changed everything. She's a reminder for each of us today is that what we have gone through or what we have faced does not define the things we can do for our Lord or the things we may do. Our past does not disqualify us from what the Lord has in store for us. Don't allow those labels that people put on you to stick. Don't be defined by the words or the descriptions of others. And don't believe that you are not worthy or worthwhile either. Don't label yourself as a no one or as a failure. And don't worry about the labels the world's sticking on you because they're sticking labels on us. Instead, walk in faith and be courageous and boldly carry the label of being redeemed by Jesus Christ. Walk in the truth that you are a Christian and live in the hope of your redemption as a brother and sister to Christ. Because regardless of all things, that is the only label that will ever matter. Not who we were, not who society says we are, but who Jesus says we are. Hebrews 2 verse 11 says, "So now Jesus and the ones he makes holy have the same Father. That is why Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brothers and sisters. For he said to God, I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you among your assembled people. He also said, I will put my trust in him. That is, I and the children God has given me. Because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood. The Son also became flesh and blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil who had the power of death. Only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. We also know that the Son did not come to help angels. He came to help the descendants of Abraham. Therefore, it was necessary for him to be made in every respect like us, his brothers and sisters, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. Since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested, and we will be tested. And I like that in verse 16. It says, the Son did not come to help the angels. He came to help us. He came to offer a sacrifice that would forever take away our sins. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil who had the power of death. Only in this way could he set free all who live their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. And only this way could he free us from all these other descriptions, all these other labels, all these other fake identities. And Jesus has called us his own. He shed his blood and died for us. And if you believe that, if you believe that Jesus is your Savior, there is no other label, there is no pronoun, there's no description, there is no identity in this world that can carry any weight to who you are. Let history define you as it will. Let your neighbors define you as they will. But let us define our lives as those who have been redeemed and as those who have hope. You are a Christian whose freedom was bought and paid for by the blood of the one who created us. And it is by that blood we are free.